if you take a petri dish and you put bacteria in there and you put a little bit of nutrients and then you seal the petri dish, the bacteria will grow and their population will double every generation. And they will be at their most successful number one generation before they go extinct because of lack of resources. The petri dish is the world. We're the bacteria. I hope we can be smarter than the bacteria.
Well, something that it's, for me is very particularly interesting is the decentralization of the workforce. So we are having these really large groups of micro workforces, like the best example is the Uber drivers, for example, that they're not really workers, but at the same time they are, and they relate to an organization that is basically an algorithm. So that is super curious because that forces us to rethink the future of work.
I think the biggest innovation that's going to shake up all of our fields is actually reinventing the company. The company as an idea from the 17th century. And I think technologies like Bitcoin and blockchain, they are fundamentally about reorganizing how we build companies.
That's what we don't have today. We have centralized systems, privileged systems, where there are basically monopolies, Google, Facebook, Airbnb, Uber, that are just perpetuating the old power relationships that we've had, the monopolies. They're creating, a new feudalism.
What is the most important thing is that as the world is becoming more platformized and people are moving to these kinds of new businesses and platforms and technologies, they're very much coming as individuals. And I think that what we're going to start to see is that groups will start to come together and algorithms will be in service to these groups. Platforms will be in service to these groups rather than the other way around. We're just at the very first stage of this part of the economy. So we think it is the new reality, but it is in fact just the first stage.
And the other very exciting technology is the blockchain. It's a way of decentralizing trust. So it's a way of building governance on top of this distributed network. So instead of trusting a centralized institution, we can now think of ways of building governance in a distributed way.
Because the blockchain makes possible sort of, not so much Bitcoin, which is sort of interesting, but not the most interesting thing. The most interesting thing, I think, is the ability of the blockchain to support different forms of agreements and contracts and identities and other things that are secured by communitarian mechanisms in the absence of institutions and central actors. And that could be an interesting backbone, I think, of a potential alternative economic system in some way.
Yeah, you know what I find really interesting is this evolving idea of currency. Whether it's hyper-local, where local people have their own kinds of currency, whether it's new or whether it's actually quite old, in addition to Bitcoin and all this crypto currency. And that you're seeing this from the really super local, face-to-face, all the way up to what we can barely imagine. And yet it's the same kind of parallel of alternative money. And I don't know where that's going to go, but I have a gut that there's something very important about that.
What happens next? Is it a catastrophic collapse of some sort? Is it a peaceful one or a violent one? We are seeing a system that is not fit for purpose anymore. We're seeing the death of democracies around the world. We still call them democracies, but they are democracies only in name and possibly in votes. But that's not a democracy without the democratic instruments. So we're seeing people express themselves and express their unhappiness with the system in various ways. So I think we're seeing a system that is, one way or another, on the verge of collapse.
We've abdicated the right to decide for ourselves how we want to be governed for far too long. And it's time we sort of reclaim that power to basically build and make our own decisions about how we want to organize our lives and our societies.
Systemic inequality has reached a point where we are seeing a huge amount of protest because that is the only way that we can get our voices heard.
So at the moment, the basis for representation in politics is based on territory. Someone represents you because you are born or you live in a certain physical space. And I think that responds to an information technology that it's pretty old. That's the printing press and the industrial society. So we can now rethink representation as a highly dynamic and fluid process that is emerging, that is horizontal, and that it's based on trust and knowledge.
The curious thing today is that we built a system that believes that we can have infinite growth with finite resources. That also happens to be the definition of madness. If you said the future doesn't exist, I would entirely agree with you. The future will be what we make it. Every day, with every decision that each one of us takes in the present. There is only the present.
Obviously the future doesn't exist, it's going to be made. So my response would be, the question is, who's going to make it?
I mean, of course the future exists, right? It's just, I think change is going to be massive, but I don't think it's going to come from the sharing economy. It's going to come from the general collapse of systems that we recognize right now, which is going to take place in the second half of the century as we face the consequences of an ecological apocalypse.
I feel relieved because I think we can create it. And it's up to us.